Thank you very much for having me here 1 year again. Um, my name is Ariel Treco. I am the CEO of Data Brain. This is a neuromarketing specialized agency here in Argentina and Latin America. We are talking today about this process of ERPs or event-related potentials to evaluate the spokesperson. We are evaluating how Messi impacts with Adidas, and then we, in the maybe in the end of the presentation, we will talk about how Messi works inside a commercial. Let's talk about why ERPs from brands and spokesperson. Well, first, in marketing, we tend to evaluate a spokesperson with very familiar tools, maybe recall, liking, state feed with the brand. Those measures are useful, but they are also very slow and very, let's say, conscious. By the time we ask people what they think about the celebrity, most of the interesting neural processing has already happened hundreds of milliseconds earlier. For a brand like Adidas, choosing a spokesperson such as Messi is extremely expensive and a strategic decision. What we really want to know is not only do people say they like him, but how does the brain react in the first 300 to 600 milliseconds when Messi appears with the brand. That window is where attention is captured, where semantic consistency is checked, and where emotional relevance begins to build. This is exactly what event-related potentials allow us to measure. Components such as P3 and 400 and late positive potential give us time result markers of attention allocation. I will explain a little later why we chose those three components, the P3 and 400 and the late positive potential. In this study, what we made is compare three levels of association with Adidas. In one side, Messi as an iconic spokesperson, then non-celebrity players, and the brand, the imaginary brand, the logo brand by itself. This gives us a more objective neural answer to a classic business question: is Messi or is a celebrity really the really best vehicle for this brand? But not only that, we also want to talk about in which context this spokesperson will work better. Well, before we talk about the experimental design. I want to round the discussion in what ERPs actually give us in this study. When we show a stimulus on the screen, a face, maybe a brand logo, a jersey, the brain responds with a very stereotyped sequence of electrical changes. If we align the EEG to the onset of each image and average across many repetitions, we obtain the event-related potentials, or ERPs. These are not just noise smoothed out. It means that each peak, each deflection corresponds to a particular stage of information processing in our brain, specifically in the cortical area, because we use EEG. And for the Messi Adidas case, we are interested in three of these stages. The first one is the P3. It's a positive deflection that typically appears around 300 to 450, 100 milliseconds after the image maximal over parietal sites. Like we will talk about this a bit later, but we measure it in the electrode PZ, that is a central parietal electrode. In cognitive terms, the P3 is a marker of attentional and motivational relevance. A higher P3 means that the brain has marked that stimulus as salient, worth allocating processing resources to. In a brand context, if Messi face or the Adidas brand logo with Messi reliably produce a larger P3 than other stimuli, it means they are winning the competition for attention at a very early automatic level. The second marker, the N400, is a negative deflection that peaks roughly between 350 and 500 milliseconds over central parietal electrodes. The N400 comes from the language and semantic literature, but it is generalized by very well to brands. It indexes semantic integration, how easily the brain can reconcile this person with the brand. That means all that I know about this person fits with this brand, and also we compare that with the narrative context. Larger N400 amplitudes means more effort or even a sense of incongruity. It's more difficult to interpret. So if a non-celebrity paired with the Adidas logo evokes a bigger N400 than Messi with the same logo, that is telling us that something about is perceived as a conceptual fit. Finally, we look at the late positive potential, or the LPP, which extends from about 500 to 800 milliseconds beyond, and maybe beyond, maybe to 1,000 milliseconds is probably to be measured too. It is from center or over central and parietal sites in our cortical area. The LPP is less about detection and more about sustained emotional engagement. It increases when stimulus is affectively significant for the viewer, and things are motivationally important, emotionally charged, or relevant at a personal level. In brand terms, a stronger LPP means that the image or the stimulus is not only noticed but also kept online or longer in our emotional systems. So it's maybe linked to the memory too. P3 in summary, P3 will tell us which images are winning early attentional relevance, and 400 will tell us how well a spokesperson brand pairing makes sense at a semantic level. LPP will tell us which combinations sustain emotional engagement over time. In the next slides, I will keep coming back to this simply mapping attention, semantic fit, and emotional engagement. That's maybe the bridge between the ERP's waveforms you will see on the screen, and the strategic question of whether Messi is or not the right spokesperson for Adidas in this context. And one quick but important clarification before we move on: when I say positive or negative component, P, for example, P3 is reference to a positive, and N400 reference to a negative deflection. When we say positive or negative in this context, we are not talking about good or bad reactions. Initially, positive and negative only refer to the direction of the voltage at the scalp. A negative N400 does not mean that the brain dislikes the stimulus. It means the brain is working harder to integrate it semantically. In the same way, a larger positive LPP or a P3 is not moral approval, it's stronger sustained emotional engagement. So whenever you see a plus or minus in the waveforms, think processing style and intensity, no like versus dislike. Well, let's talk about the experimental design, how we decompose the spokesperson. Before looking at ERPs, we need a design that lets us answer a clean business question: what exactly is Messi adding to the brand, in this case to the Adidas brand? And to do that, we did not treat Messi in the ad as a single monolithic element. Instead, we decompose the spokesperson into separate visual and conceptual pieces, and turn each of them into an experimental condition. In the first row, you will see faces only, messy faces, the kind of all the style of messy faces that we use. You will see that they are in black and white. In the second row, you will find neutral faces, all also black and white. We made the histograms similar, so the impact in the eyes were similar, and black and white to, well, to maybe not use colors to distract or use another sensory stimulus. Then you will find the brand Adidas combined alone, and then combined with the messy face and neutral face. Just an acceleration here. We use all the messy faces with the logo and all the neutral faces also with the logo. And just for space issues, I just put those images here. And we made the same because the objective, final objective of this study is to establish if Messi helps to Adidas to sell the new jersey, because that's the commercial that's in that just released Adidas these days. Well, we then chose the jersey alone, the Adidas symbol in the jersey with messy faces, with neutral faces, and compare all of these with the neutral stimulus. You will find that those images or those control shapes are abstract and non-brand, but respect some similar maybe directions or shapes similar to the logo, or also the colors. Well, now let me briefly go through how we measure the brain response. We use neuroelectrics Innovio 8. The system, the EEG system from neuroelectrics, and we sample at 500 hertz. That's it's a very high level of sampling. Is a very high resolution. Each trial was segmented in 2000 milliseconds before the stimulus, so before the image on set, to 800 milliseconds after. I think that you are still, I don't know, let me check if you are in the same, okay. Yes, we are in the same slide. Okay. The pre-stimulus windows is used as a baseline, so all ERPs you see are changes relative to that rest period. Operationally, the study ran in 9 motions, which handle stimulus presentations, event markers, and raw EEG acquisition. Then we export the data and process everything in Python using the MNE toolbox. It's a very powerful library for Python. I think that with the time it's going to replace MATLAB. Well, we use MNE to filter, epoching, and averaging by condition, and finally computing the topo maps. It is important to stress that in commercial neuromarketing work, we almost never rely on EEG alone. We typically combine it with eye tracking, or a galvanic skin response, or facial coding, sometimes heart rate, to build a more robust and multi-channel view of the customer response. But for today's talks, thought I will focus on EEG and ERPs part of the pipeline, because it is already quite rich and it keeps the story manageable within the time we have here today. Well, before looking at Messi versus other conditions, I want to show you that the EEG system and the pre-processing are behaving properly. What you see here is the grand average ERP across all visual stimuli and all participants. Each color line is one electrode, and together they form a nice smooth waveform. There is no sign of drifting baselines, no high-frequency noise dominating the signal, which tell us that the acquisition, filtering, and epoching were successful. Notice this broad positive between roughly 300, around 300 here, this area, 300 and 800 milliseconds maximal over centroparietal size. This is actually the temporal region where we expect the classic P3 and 400 late positive potential family to live. It tells us that the visual stimuli are doing their job. They are being perceived, evaluated, and integrated at the cortical level. On the top row, you have topomaps here, this area, at 3 representative time points. The activity is not random from one map to the next. We see a consistent posterior focus that shifts gradually, which is what you want in real ERPs, not artifacts. At the bottom, the gray curve is the global, here, this is the global field power. GFP is the simple standard deviation of voltage across all electrodes at each time point. In other words, how strongly the whole scalp is responding at once. The main GFP peaks tell us when the brain as a whole is most engaged by the stimuli. And the rest of the talk, when I refer to P3 window, the N400 window, or LPP window, those time ranges are anchored in these GFP peaks. Here, and here. So that means that they are data driving and not just arbitrary choices. Let me P3 and 400 and late positive potential. Well, let's continue to the ERP results. In this slide, I am only showing PZ here. PZ is a parietal electrode in the center, because this is where the parietal P3 is maximal in our montage. The two traces are the grand averages across participants. In orange, the neutral phases. In blue, Messi's phase. What I want you to notice is that between roughly 300 and 500 milliseconds, the neutral phases show a clearly larger positive deflection than Messi. So in terms of classical ERP terminology, neutral players are producing stronger P3 than the global superstar Messi. This does not mean that the brain likes the neutral players more. In ERP language, positive or negative voltage is about polarity, not about good or bad. What a larger P3 usually tells us is that the stimulus is being treated as more informative, maybe more novel or update worthy, let's say, for the current context. In this sample, Messi is a highly familiar, almost expected figure. Seeing him in Adidas context does not require much additional updating. The brain has already rehearsed and learned that association with Messi many times. The neutral figures may, by contrast, trigger more who is this person and processing. They are less predictable, so they require more parietal attentional resources. Functionally, this result is important for brand work. It suggests that a hyper-familiar spokesperson can become almost background and not the principal figure at the level of attentional updating, while secondary characters may actually carry more of the informative load in the scene. Well, on the previous slide, at the time course in PZ, here I want to show you where in the scalp this P3 effects is coming from. These three topo maps are run averages in P3 window around 375 milliseconds. On the left, you see the P3 for Messi's face, in the middle, P3. On the right, the difference map. That means that the Messi topo map is minus the neutral phase. We have this result here. In blue areas means that the neutral phase shows stronger activation, and in red areas here, in this specific topo map, red areas means that Messi produces stronger responses. This is exactly what you will expect from a classical P3, posterior positivity reflecting attentional updating. So we are not looking at two different systems. It's the same networking being recruited. The second point is amplitude. Neutral faces show stronger parietal positivity than Messi. When we subtract the two in the difference map, you can clearly see where Messi is weaker in P3, mainly over parietal and occipital electrodes. This in marketing terms, this means that the neutral players demand more attentional resources for this audience, while Messi's processes as a highly familiar, low surprise image. The brand is still using the same P3 mechanisms, but Messi requires less updating, so his P3 is smaller in this case. Now let's look at the P3 time window for the logo conditions. On this plot, you see three curves at PZ. Electrode, blue is the Adidas logo alone, orange is logo plus neutral phase, and green is the logo plus Messi in the 300 to 500 milliseconds window. Both the orange and the blue wave show a larger deflection away from zero than the green one. In our montage, that deflection is negative, but design is not the important part. What matters is the magnitude of the change related to the baseline. That is what we use as P3 index. A larger P3 in this context means that the brain is doing more attentional updating in response to that combination. So logo alone and logo plus a neutral phase trigger more updating than logo plus Messi. Maybe the interesting point is that Messi plus logo pairing, which is highly familiar for the audience, actually requires less P3-like processing. The system treats it as a fluent, almost expected association, just as we saw before with Messi face compared to neutral faces. Just to emphasize this again, for the non-EG people, more positive or negative voltage at this electrode does not mean good or bad. It simply tells us how much processing power is being devoted to that stimulus in this particular time window. On the previous slide, we look at P3 curves in PZ. Here, we switch to the spatial story, how the P3 is distributed over the scalp for the logo conditions. On the top row, you see the group P3 topographies around 375 milliseconds. The logo alone produces a fairly compact parietal occipital pattern. Attention is strongly focused on the logo as single visual object. When we add a face, the P3 field becomes broader and more structured with a neutral face. We see a more distributed parietal pattern, and with Messi, we get a different configuration again. So it is not just more or less amplitude. The shape of the attentional field changes depending on who is standing next to the logo. The bottom row shows difference maps subtracting the logo alone condition. Here, we subtract to the neutral and subtracting with Messi. This highlights what is added by pairing the brand with a person. You can see that both neutral face and Messi face require additional posterior resources, but with partially different spatial emphasis, suggesting different integration processes between the brand and the person. And just to repeat this, let's say, caveat, the colors here are relative voltage, not good or bad. And what we interpret these regions that are most engaged in updating the stimulus when the logo appears along with a neutral person or with Messi. We see here, for example, that if we subtract the logo alone to the neutral logo, the logo alone requires more activity in central, in frontal, and parietal areas, but with Messi in frontal areas. So most areas of our brain are dedicated to Messi and not to interpret the logo. So Messi, what he's doing here is to simplifying that logo interpretation. That means that maybe a good link to Adidas. Well, here we move from attention to conceptual fit using the N400. The N400 is a classic marker of semantic integration, larger negativity in this 350 to 500 milliseconds window tell us that the brain is doing more work to answer the question, how does this go together? And when we look at the PC, the electrode here, the combination of the Adidas logo with a neutral, unknown face produces the strongest N400 in this deflection. That pattern suggests that for this audience, the brain has to work harder to connect that person with the brand. In contrast, the Adidas logo paired with Messi shows a noticeably smaller N400 in the same time window. Conceptually, Messi is already embedded in a football and a World Cup semantic network, so the logo spokesperson pairing is integrated more fluently. The topo maps below here supports this reading. We are not just seeing a single channel fluctuation, the spatial distribution of activity changes semantically across conditions, which is what we expect when underlying cognitive operations is different. Well, on this slide, I'm no longer showing the raw conditions. What you see here is, here are different maps for each spokesperson. We subtract the logo alone condition to, well, this allows us to look at what the face contributes on top of the brand symbol itself. On the left, the neutral spokesperson produces a pronounced N400-like configuration, specifically over central parietal regions. Here, central parietal regions. And this is a pattern is typical of situations where the brain needs to invest more effort to make sense of the combination, like in this case. On the right, when the logo is paired with Messi, the residual N400 is more limited in extent, in intensity. Conceptually, the system is not fighting with the pairing. Messi is already embedded in the audience internal model of football and World Cup and Adidas. These different topographies are useful because they show that conceptual fits is not single number at one electrode. It emerges as spatial patterns that changes when the brand symbol is attached to a different spokesperson. Well, here we move from what is processed to for how long it stays relevant. The component we are looking at is the late positive potential at CZ. That means that is a center electrode. Conceptually, the LPP tells us how long the stimulus keeps access to motivated attention after the first evaluation. It's a kind of, let's say, persistence of relevance signal. In the highlighted window between about 500 and 800 milliseconds, the combination of Messi plus the Adidas logo shows a sustained positive deflection that that pattern is typically associated with stimuli that keeps motivational significance over time. The brain is still investing resources in that image when the trial is already moving on. When we show the logo on its own, the late activity gradually shifts negative. The system responded, processed the brand, and then the relevance decays here. The neutral phase with the logo sits in between, closer to baseline. There is emotional value, but it tell us how much mental shelf space each execution occupies on every exposure. In this data set, the Messi logo combination is the version that stays alive longer in the viewer's brains here in this area. Now we move from the time course to the spatial pattern of the LPP. These maps show the group average about 650 milliseconds in the late evaluative window where sustained motivated attention typically appears. On the left here, With the low alone, parital activity is relatively weak and predominantly negative in practical terms. The brain has already started to let go of the stimulus. Motivational relevance is fading here. The middle map here corresponds to the neutral phase with Adidas logo. Here, the LPP becomes stronger and shifts toward frontal central areas. The system is investing more resources in the social meaning of the scene, but the pattern looks relatively diffuse from a branding point of view. And on the right, when Messi appears with the logo, we see a robust occipitoparital positivity, especially on the right hemisphere. This configuration is typically of sustained motivated attention. The system keeps evaluating the stimulus as relevant and emotionally loaded. That evaluation is anchored on the visual field where the brand elements sit. So within the same temporal window, the spokesperson changes not only how much late activity we see, but also where that activity is organized across the scalp. That is exactly what we want when we ask whether a spokesperson is actually helping the brand and the logo is staying motivational and interesting for the viewer. Well, this is great, but the idea is to check if this spokesperson works in a full commercial. So from the snapshot to full commercial, we didn't put the video just for time issues, but the goal of the commercial is to maybe appeal to a football identity, our dream. We really like win World Cups, but of course, this promote the jersey for next World Cup. The methodology we use this two analysis based, the inter-subject correlation and the alpha asymmetry. And we analyze key cultural anchors. This commercial successful activates highly resonant Argentine symbols. Truco game is a cards game that we really play when we meet with friends and we drink mate, an asado, and so as a barbecue asado, and mate is an infusion. We all drink mate here in Argentina, so this commercial appeals to cultural symbols, and also use a lot of football players that are today playing in Argentina team, and also some figures out of the football. Is in. Well, here we move from a single trial ERPs to a group level measure, inter-subject correlation, or ISC. ISC tells us second by second how similar the EEG responses are across viewers. When the curve goes up, brains are reacting in a synchronous way, which we interpret as shared attention and common emotional or cognitive state. If we look at the in-chart trace, the average ISC is relatively modest, about 0.9 here, and only around 10% of the commercial sits above the ninth percentile threshold. That is useful because it shows that, the spot is not just loud all the time, it has shape attention curve. The commercial has a problem that is full of scene changes, and that may impact in our capacity to follow the commercial and our cognitive demand. The first interesting wave happens very early, around 8 to 10 seconds. This is when it's a truco game, this cards game. Starts and the familiar symbols appear, cards, mate, this barbecue, the informal table sitting. Well, the ISC peak here confirms that the audience immediately logs onto the situation and shares the same reading of the scene. A second stronger peak appears around 27 to 30 seconds at the moment of narrative tension and humor. Here appears, well, it's an artist, Bizarrap, asks a question about that game card, and we get a goal in the. There is another scene. I don't know if you call metegol or football. I don't know. Well, it's this table game with players. Um, well, all typically scenes that generate peaks around here. This is a wrap, this is a barbecue. And this is the very important scene in all the commercial that carries a big problem. That is, this is in here. This is in here, maybe you can see it really well, but there appears the president of the Football Association, in the Argentinian Football Association, that nowadays is well, has problems in his managing the association, and is very questioning. And it's a previous scene to the Messi scene. Messi in that scene is like a game that he says, "I won the fourth cup." It's a way to confirm that he's going to play the next World Cup, and he wants to go for the fourth World Cup for Argentina. So the most important part is the final is this final section. Well, uh, let's see how we really have to get care about how we are montage these scenes in the near future. From a neuromarketing perspective, the window is the primary coding moment of the ad, the place where the message about the four-star, the national dream, and the association with Adidas is almost likely to be stored as a shared memory. And well, in the other a measure that we use, the frontal alpha symmetry, FAA, as a marker of motivation. The frontal alpha symmetry is derived from the balance of alpha power over left and right frontal sides. When the curve goes positive, we see relatively more left frontal activation, which decades of research linked to approach-oriented states, interest, desire, readiness, or to move towards something. When the curve goes negative, the pattern is more consistent with withdrawal or avoidance. Importantly, positive and negative here are purely neuroscientific labels. They do not mean good or bad in a moral sense. If we take the world commercial, the average of this FAA is slightly above zero. And the audience spend roughly 60% of the time in an approach-like state. So the baseline tone of the spot is already leaning toward interest and attraction. Then we can zoom into case segments in the 28 to 30 second, maybe this area. We have positive FAA. When in that scene, we see this truco, these cards games, and cultural symbols that play, escalate, and get humor plus competition. FAA rises clearly. The brain is treating those moments as rewarding. People are not just following the story; they are enjoying this challenge. Later, between about 45 and 50 seconds, we see another sustained positive shift with the warm team scenes. Our goalkeeper, Dibu Martinez, is smiling, the friendly interactions and emotional music. That part seems to consolidate an affective association around the players and the shared national feeling. But the most important section is again the climax, roughly to around here, 60 to 65 with Messi. confirming his participation. We see, well, it's another sustained positive shift with the warm team scenes. Here, FFA reaches its highest values between the president of our association challenges Messi, and Messi responds with a positive answer. Well, in motivational terms, this is where the spot concentrates the strongest tendency to move toward to the message. The four star as a collective dream, frame inside this Adidas world. Messi saying that this is time window is our main motivational coding moment, and it aligns nicely with the ISC peak we saw in the previous slide. Well, you can see now how Messi functions inside the commercial. The ad spends almost a full minute building a symbolic ecosystem, this truco card game, everyday rituals, humor, music, the team celebrating. This element increases tension and keep the brain busy, aligning to the story. Messi only appears when that build-up is ready, at exact moments. Well, he confirms his participations. Two things happen in the brain data. First, intersubject correlation reaches its highest value. The audience is not just paying attention, they are processing the same moment in a very similar way. That is collective synchronization around a single idea. Second, frontal alpha symmetry shows its strongest positive values in the same time window. The mindset shifts into a clearly approach-oriented motivational state. In simple terms, people are leaning toward the message, not away from it. So Messi amplifies a process that has been carefully prepared by the narrative. He resolves the tension created. He embodies the collective dream of the for start, and he does it inside the Adidas visual universe. And of course, from a neuromarketing perspective, that is where the spokesperson truly earns their fee at the precise moment when attention is aligned, motivation peaks, and the brand is on the screen. Well, to framework this work. In this last part, I want to leave you with a simple framework that brands can actually use on the experimental side. ERPs give us three very stable dimensions. For example, in this case, P3 tell us which elements receive attentionally priority, and 400 tell us how fluently the brain links to spokesperson and the brand at conceptual level. And LPP shows how long this combination keeps its motivational relevance. When we move forward static images to the full commercial, we add two group metrics. Intersubject correlation shows how synchronized viewers become, which is crucial if a brand wants collective moments. Maybe you will find this measure as engagement in some lectures. Of course, this tells us, or the ideas tell us, these collective moments of attention. Frontal alpha symmetry tells us whether the dominant state leans toward approach motivation or withdrawal along the timeline of the ad. And a spokesperson become a good choice when these measures converge. The face logo pairing captures attention efficiently, integrates well with the brand semantic word, and sustains a late emotionally loaded response. This is why we first test decompose stimuli, face along, low along, combinations, control figures, contextual symbols, and then validate everything with the finished film using these metrics, ISS and FAA. Now we can answer the uncomfortable question: does Messi really work as a spokesperson, or is he just an expensive habit? Well, the face-only results show something important. The P3 is actually larger for the neutral face. That does not mean that the neutral player is better. It tells us that in this sample or in this study, Messi is already part of a very stable mental model. his face generates less novelty levels because the audience knows exactly who he is, and he's a global icon. This is really what we expect. When we introduce the Adidas logo, the pattern changes. The logo alone drives a strong response, which confirms the power of the visual identity. The combination with Messi produces an ERP profile that aligns well with conceptual fit. The N400 suggests that Messi-Adidas association flows more easily than neutral faces with Adidas pairing. And the LPP indicates sustained motivated attention to that association. The full commercial gives us the definitive test. The inter-subject correlation claims whenever the story hits a key beat, and the maximum peaks appears when Messi says that he's going to play the next World Cup. And the frontal alpha symmetry tells the same story from the motivational angle. The highest positive values appear in exactly that window after he built up this challenge with the president of the federation. He responds a challenge with these card games. And the brain data are basically telling us this is the coding moment. So in this context, Messi functions as an amplifier of a collective dream that already exists in people's heads, in Argentinians. The World Cup, the team, the fourth star, the national narrative. Adidas position its brand right inside that peak of the shared attention and approach motivation from a neuroscientific point of view. That has an effective use of the spokesperson and a good idea to sell the new Argentinian jersey. To generalize from Messi Arias case, brands can follow a very concrete checklist. First, clarify what you expect from a spokesperson. Some profiles are chosen to bring novelty, others to signal trust or competence, others to act as cultural anchors. Those roles translate into different neural signatures, more P3, more N400, more LPP, different frontal asymmetry patterns. Second, design, decompose ERP studies, test phases, logos combination, and supporting symbols. Ask three simple questions. Who helps the brand with attentional priority? Who integrates most fluently with the logo and the narrative word? And who keeps strong late LPP, late positive potential, when the brand cue is present? And well, third, move to the finished commercial and look at inter-subset correlation and frontal alpha symmetry. The strongest, branding moments should line up with peaks in synchronization and in approach motivation. If the peaks are elsewhere, for instance, in shows that do not show the brand or the symbol that the brand wants to sell, there is a strategic problem. Fourth, read topographies. The scalp maps show how the attentional field and semantic processing are organized. This spatial information helps understand whether the spokesperson is reinforcing the brand or pulling resources away from it. And finally, treat neuroscience as a decision partner. These measures do not replace strategic thinking or long-term equity tracking, but they reveal processes that are invisible to recall or liking scores. When brands combine both words, they gain much sharper view of whether their spokesperson is truly earning their place in the story. And with that, we can close the loop. ERPs help us decompose what Messi brings to Adidas, and the inter-subject correlation and the frontal alpha symmetry show how that value plays out in real commercial, watched by real audience. Well, grazie mille. We have reached the end of the presentation.